Winter, 1943. The forests of eastern Poland are silent, except for the distant crack of frozen branches. Beneath the snow lies a secret the world won't learn for decades. A train, its steel hull sealed, its cargo manifest erased from every record. When it finally emerges from the dark, years later, investigators uncover more than gold or art. They find documents, names, orders, and a map leading deep into the forgotten machinery of Nazi ambition. It's here, between the buried rails and broken stone, that history whispers what it tried to hide, and where our story begins. Chapter 1: The World Before the Fire. Before the war, Europe moved with a fragile rhythm, a continent still limping from the wounds of the last great conflict. Streets bustled with life, but beneath the laughter and cafe chatter lay something taut, something waiting to snap. Berlin pulsed with ambition. London held its breath. Paris dreamed, as it always did, of peace that never seemed to last. Across the oceans, America watched, wary yet distant, unsure if the storm gathering over Europe would reach its shores again. In Germany, the promises of renewal had turned to fevered conviction. Flags rose from every building, bright against grey skies. Radios echoed with speeches, confident, rhythmic, intoxicating. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. To many, it sounded like strength. To others, it sounded like a door closing. Neighbors whispered less. Questions were dangerous. Those who asked them disappeared. In the East, the Soviet Union marched to its own drum. Stalin's purges had emptied villages and filled prisons, but his factories roared. The Red Army swelled. The air was thick with fear and determination. Poland, caught in between, stood like a man between two approaching trains, knowing one or both would hit, but unsure from which side first. The ordinary people, farmers, teachers, mechanics, mothers, lived their lives in the shadow of politics they didn't choose. Breadlines in Warsaw, empty shelves in Berlin, families listening at night for footsteps in the hallway that didn't belong. Yet despite it all, life went on. Children still played in courtyards, couples still danced. There was still laughter, though quieter now. Careful laughter. The Great Depression had left scars everywhere. Nations turned inward. Blame became currency. Leaders spoke not of compromise but of destiny. Borders tightened. Armies drilled. The old alliances, France and Britain, tried to hold the line with treaties and cautious diplomacy. But diplomacy was slow and ambition was fast. In Tokyo, the rising sun of empire burned brighter every year. In Rome, Mussolini promised a return to Roman glory. Across Europe, small nations trembled as old empires rearmed. The League of Nations spoke in resolutions no one obeyed. War wasn't yet declared, but everyone could feel it breathing at the edge of every newspaper headline. In the mountains of Bavaria, Hitler met with his generals. Plans unfolded across wide oak tables, maps, red strings, and code names. Operation White, Operation Sea Lion, Operation Barbarossa, the language of conquest disguised as strategy. He spoke with certainty about space, destiny, revenge. He said the next war would be swift, efficient, and total. His eyes did not blink when he said it. Meanwhile, Britain watched from across the Channel. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, umbrella in hand, believed he could hold peace through reason. He spoke softly, appealing to logic, to restraint. But the world was no longer logical. The cameras captured his smile as he declared, "Peace for our time." Behind him, the factories of Germany ran through the night. In the cafes of Paris, intellectuals debated fascism versus freedom over cups of coffee gone cold. In the fields of Ukraine, peasants whispered about soldiers requisitioning grain. And in the back rooms of Moscow, the ink dried on a secret pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement, dividing Eastern Europe before the war had even begun. August 1939. A month heavy with dread. Children played under skies that would soon be filled with planes. Train stations hummed with restless energy. Soldiers departing, civilians arriving, both unsure where safety was anymore. On the first day of September, when the tanks crossed into Poland, the world exhaled and then held its breath again. For the people on the ground, the noise came before the understanding. A low hum, then the rumble of engines, then fire. Villages burned before the telegrams even reached Warsaw. The radio crackled with the words that changed everything. This is not a drill. The war had begun. In London, Big Ben tolled over an anxious city. Churchill, not yet Prime Minister, wrote in his diary that the lights were going out again, one by one. In Berlin, crowds cheered in the streets. In the east, Soviet troops crossed the border, slicing Poland from behind. For the soldiers marching forward, it was duty. For those in their path, it was the end of the world they knew. And yet, even in those first chaotic weeks, humanity flickered. A German medic handing water to a wounded Polish boy, a farmer hiding a neighbor's family in his barn, a teacher burning her own records to protect the names of her students. The machinery of war was vast, but courage, quiet, desperate courage, survived between its gears. By the winter of 1939, Europe was divided again. France waited behind its Maginot Line. Britain prepared its airfields. Germany dug in. But under the frozen ground of Poland, something else was buried. Something not on any official map. It would stay there, silent, through fire, defeat, and occupation, waiting for the day it would be found and remind the world what was really lost beneath the noise of war. Chapter 2: The Descent into Darkness. War does not begin in a single moment. It builds, layer upon layer of fear, pride, and desperation, until the world tips. By 1940, that balance was gone. Europe was no longer a continent of nations, but a chessboard ruled by ideology. Every move drew blood. Every silence cost lives. In Berlin, the machinery of the Reich grew louder. Hitler's voice filled the airwaves, declaring destiny, vengeance, purity. His generals nodded, though many had doubts they would never dare to speak. The propaganda was relentless. Posters promised a new world. Radios whispered of enemies within. Students memorized slogans before arithmetic, and neighbors watched neighbors, afraid of what a single word could bring. In the factories, steel poured like water. Bombers, tanks, rifles, all feeding an army that seemed unstoppable. The invasion of France came like lightning. German panzers rolled through the Ardennes, where no army was supposed to pass. Paris fell in just 6 weeks. Refugees fled south, dragging carts, carrying children, leaving behind everything that made them who they were. Across the Channel, Britain stood alone. Churchill had taken the helm now, a man with fire in his voice and fear in his eyes. "We shall never surrender," he said, and people believed him. Yet at night, as the bombs fell on London, courage and terror mixed in equal measure. Families huddled in the underground while the city burned above them. You could smell the smoke in the morning fog, feel the dust of brick and memory in every breath. But the story of this war wasn't only written in Europe. In the East, Stalin moved his pieces carefully, expanding his reach while Germany distracted the world. He annexed the Baltics, crushed Finland's resistance, and waited. He trusted Hitler's word. For a time, the secret pact between them, dividing Poland, had given the illusion of order. Yet deep down, both men knew it would end in betrayal. In Tokyo, the empire reached further, into China, into the Pacific. The rising sun spread its shadow over oceans and islands, tightening its grip on resources and trade routes. The world's attention was fixed on Europe, and Japan used that blindness to build its own empire. Methodical, ruthless, unstoppable. By late 1940, the skies above Britain became the new front line. The Battle of Britain wasn't just fought by pilots, but by the will of a nation. Young men, many barely 20, took to the air, knowing the odds. Never in the field of human conflict, Churchill would later say, was so much owed by so many to so few. But even he couldn't see how far the darkness would spread. The German war machine pressed onward. Norway, Denmark, the Balkans, each invasion faster than the last. In the occupied territories, the SS followed the soldiers. Efficient, silent, methodical. Lists were drawn, ghettos established, trains began to move with precision. To the outside world, they carried resettlements. To those who vanished inside them, they carried silence. Amid the chaos, resistance flickered like candlelight. Underground printers in Warsaw, couriers in the Netherlands, codebreakers in Bletchley Park, tapping away at secrets they could never speak of aloud. These were people who fought with information, not guns, and their victories would remain hidden for decades. And then came the summer of 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 3 million German soldiers crossed into the Soviet Union, sweeping through forests and plains with terrifying speed. Entire villages burned in hours. Columns of prisoners stretched for miles. For the first time, even the most loyal generals began to sense the enormity of what had begun. The war was no longer just a conflict. It was an extermination. Soviet propaganda called it the Great Patriotic War. Every man, woman, and child was expected to fight, to endure. Stalin's orders were absolute, not one step back. Soviet soldiers dug trenches with frozen hands. Civilians starved in besieged cities, clinging to hope that the Red Army would hold. Leningrad, once a city of art and music, became a place of hunger and graves. Back in Berlin, a new phase of war began, not with bombs, but with decisions. In hidden conferences behind closed doors, officials discussed the final solution. It was bureaucracy turned to murder. Names became numbers. Numbers became transports. Entire communities gone forever. And the world, distracted by the roar of armies, barely noticed. Still, whispers of truth escaped. Reports smuggled through occupied Europe spoke of camps, of chimneys, of death. Many refused to believe them. How could civilization have fallen this far? But those who saw it knew, and those who saw it never forgot. Meanwhile, in secret bunkers and laboratories, both sides experimented with technology beyond their time. Jet engines, rockets, weapons designed to change the shape of war itself. In Peenemünde, German scientists tested missiles that could fly farther than any bomb before. They dreamed of reaching London, or even beyond. They didn't know, or didn't care, that their work would one day open the door to the atomic age. As 1941 gave way to 1942, the world was burning. Yet beneath the smoke and chaos, resistance deepened. The Polish underground built networks of spies. Soviet partisans harassed German supply lines in the forests. In France, whispers of revolt grew louder. And in America, across an ocean still untouched by war, a sleeping giant began to stir. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the illusion of distance shattered. The United States entered the war, bringing its vast resources and determination with it. The conflict that had begun in Europe was now global. Oceans turned into battlefields. Every port, every factory, every family felt the weight of it, and so the descent continued. Deeper, darker. Ideology had become survival. Every soldier, every pilot, every worker was a gear in the great grinding machine of total war. But beneath it all, in forgotten corners and sealed rooms, secrets were already being buried. Technologies, experiments, operations so dangerous that even victory couldn't justify them. Decades later, when fragments of those secrets resurfaced, in bunkers, in archives, in forgotten film reels, historians would realize that the truth of this war was far more complex than the battles ever told. The world was at its breaking point. Yet in the darkness, something was being born, something that would define not only how the war was fought, but how the next one would begin. Chapter 3: Fire on the Eastern Front. June 22, 1941, dawn. The eastern horizon glowed red, not from sunrise, but from fire. German bombers filled the sky, engines howling like distant thunder. Below them, the fields of Belarus and Ukraine burned as tanks rolled eastward in endless columns. Operation Barbarossa had begun. It was not just an invasion, it was a storm the world had never seen before. For soldiers on the ground, it felt unreal. The air smelled of oil and wet earth. Dust clung to their faces, sweat mixing with gunpowder. They had been told it would be quick, a few months at most. "We will crush them before winter," one officer shouted over the roar of engines. Few doubted him. The Red Army, they believed, was weak, but they were wrong. In the first weeks, the Wehrmacht moved with terrifying precision. Town after town fell. Entire Soviet divisions vanished, encircled, destroyed, forgotten. German radio called it victory. But those on the front lines saw something else. Endless plains littered with bodies, villages burning under a pale sun, families fleeing with nothing but the clothes on their backs. War had become a flood, swallowing everything in its path. By July, the roads were choked with the debris of conquest. Broken wagons, burned-out tanks, abandoned artillery. Prisoners marched west in columns that stretched for miles. Many never made it. Food ran out. Water was scarce. The heat was unbearable. And still, the German advance pressed on, towards Smolensk, then Moscow. Every mile cost more lives. In the villages, the rules changed overnight. German officers commandeered homes. Local officials were executed in public squares. The SS followed close behind, enforcing their vision of order. Lists were drawn up. Jews, communists, undesirables. Entire communities vanished within days. To the soldiers who saw it, it was chaos turned systematic. To the victims, it was the end of the world. But not everyone bowed. In the forests beyond Minsk, small groups of partisans began to organize. Farmers, escaped soldiers, even school teachers, all armed with whatever they could find. They struck supply lines, sabotaged railways, vanished before dawn. Each act of resistance brought brutal reprisals, yet still they fought. Every life lost was a message. We are not gone yet. By autumn, the advance slowed. The roads turned to mud, swallowing trucks whole. The same rivers that carried armies forward now drowned them in their own haste. Supplies ran thin. The soldiers were cold, tired, hungry, but still driven by orders from Berlin. Moscow by Christmas, the general said. Yet as the snow began to fall, even the most loyal among them began to wonder if the East would ever end. In Moscow, panic gripped the city. Stalin had vanished from public view for days, retreating to his dacha. Some thought he had fled, but when he returned, his words were steel. Not one step back, he said. The Red Army would hold. Factories were dismantled and moved east. Entire cities carried on railways to the Urals. Women worked the assembly lines, building tanks through the night. Children collected metal scraps for bullets. The Soviet Union became a nation at war with time itself. Then came the winter. Temperatures dropped below -30. Fuel froze in tanks. Rifles jammed. Horses died where they stood. The German army, built for speed, found itself trapped in snow and silence. The Red Army struck back with a ferocity no one expected. Siberian divisions, hardened by years of cold, pushed westward. The tide began to shift. Amid the blizzards, men fought not just the enemy, but the land. Visibility vanished. Maps were useless. Communication lines froze solid. Some units were cut off for weeks, surviving on frozen bread and snowmelt. "We came as conquerors," one German private wrote in his diary. "And now we crawl like ghosts." His words were found years later, buried in ice beside his uniform. As the front stabilized, the war became something worse, a slow grind, measured in meters and months. The siege of Leningrad began. The city, surrounded and starving, refused to surrender. People ate wallpaper paste, sawdust, even the glue from books. Musicians played concerts while shells fell outside. Diaries from the time tell of unbearable hunger, yet also unbroken will. "We are still human," one entry reads, "and they will not take that." Back west, the Reich celebrated victories on paper, but in the command centers, panic spread. Supplies were running out. The Soviet Union, they realized, would not collapse like France. This was a different kind of war, one fought as much by endurance as by weapons. In 1942, the front shifted south toward the oil fields of the Caucasus and a name that would become synonymous with hell, Stalingrad, a city of factories, smoke, and stubborn pride. The Germans called it a key objective. Stalin called it a line that must not break. The battle that followed was like nothing seen before. House to house, room to room, floor to floor. Soldiers fought in the ruins of grain silos, in sewers, in stairwells filled with smoke and dust. Snipers hunted each other for days. Bodies froze where they fell. The Volga River ran red. Supplies crossed under constant bombardment. German soldiers trapped inside the city's skeleton began to starve. Commanders begged for retreat. Hitler refused. Stalingrad must not be lost, he declared. By February 1943, it was gone anyway. 90,000 German soldiers surrendered. Over 1 million on both sides lay dead or missing. The turning point of the war, written not in strategy, but in suffering. As the Soviet banners rose over the ruins, the full cost began to show. Entire armies erased, families scattered, the ground itself scarred beyond recognition. And beneath that ground, deep in sealed tunnels and forgotten bunkers, something else remained. Crates of files, strange machines, and coded documents. Some marked with the insignia of secret divisions, others with symbols no one recognized. When those tunnels were rediscovered decades later, under the forests of Poland and the mountains of Germany, they told a story that no victory parade ever could. A story of science pushed beyond morality, of men trying to outpace destruction by inventing new ways to cause it. The Eastern Front had been hell, but beneath it, another war had been waged in silence. By the time spring returned in 1943, the world had changed. The illusion of German invincibility was gone. The Red Army advanced west, one ruined city at a time. And in Berlin, behind locked doors, the architects of the Reich began drafting new plans. Desperate, secret, and monstrous, the war was far from over. But its shape had already shifted into something darker than anyone could yet imagine. Chapter 4: The Ashes of Victory. By 1945, the world was running on exhaustion. Cities that had once glowed with industry now lay silent. Skeletal streets of concrete and ash. The war had devoured everything: armies, families, faith. Even victory felt heavy, as if it came at a cost too vast to measure. In the east, the Red Army pushed relentlessly toward Berlin. Each town they entered bore the same story: ruins, graves, civilians hollowed by fear. Soviet soldiers, hardened by 4 years of slaughter, exacted vengeance with brutal precision. No one escaped the war's appetite now. It consumed liberator and victim alike. In the west, Allied forces crossed the Rhine, their boots sinking into the mud of Germany's heartland. The air was thick with the stench of fuel and death. For the men who marched through those final weeks, the world had become a blur. They passed through forests where the trees were blackened spines, through villages where every window had been blown out. The faces they met were gaunt, eyes sunken, voices quiet. Surrender had not yet been signed, but defeat was everywhere. Then came the discoveries. The first camps were liberated by Soviet troops in Poland, places with names that would sear themselves into memory: Majdanek, Auschwitz, Treblinka. Soldiers who had seen every horror war could offer stood in silence. They had expected fortresses or prisons. Instead, they found warehouses of shoes, hair, and ash. The smell was unforgettable, the scale incomprehensible. One officer wrote simply, "This is not war. This is something else." American and British units found the same in the West: Dachau, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen. Cameras rolled as they entered, documenting the unthinkable. Civilians from nearby towns were forced to walk through the gates to see what had been hidden behind fences they'd passed every day. Many wept, some denied it, others simply stared, unable to reconcile what they saw with the world they thought they knew. The war's purpose, once wrapped in speeches and slogans, was laid bare. It had never been about land alone. It was about control, ideology, fear, and what happens when humanity forgets itself. As Allied commanders ordered relief for survivors, medical teams realized the scale of starvation and disease was beyond imagination. Tens of thousands died even after liberation, too weak to recover. For the soldiers who helped bury them, the memory would never fade. Berlin fell in April. The Red Army raised its flag over the Reichstag, a red banner against a sky of smoke. Hitler was gone, his empire reduced to rubble and ghosts. The fighting stopped, but silence did not bring peace. It brought reckoning. In the ruins of Nuremberg, trials began. Men who had commanded armies and signed decrees now stood before judges, their voices trembling. The world, for the first time, spoke the word genocide. Yet even as justice began, secrets slipped through the cracks. Scientists, officers, intelligence experts, many vanished before capture. Some resurfaced in America under new names, through programs buried deep in classified files. Operation Paperclip, Operation Lusty. The race for knowledge had begun before the ashes even cooled. In Moscow, crates of confiscated documents were shipped to hidden archives. In the mountains of Bavaria, American agents uncovered laboratories devoted to propulsion, nerve agents, and strange energy weapons. What they couldn't understand, they buried, sometimes literally, sealing tunnels, locking vaults, redacting entire sections of history. The war had ended, but the secrets it birthed were too valuable, or too dangerous, to destroy. For civilians, the aftermath was quieter, but no less haunting. Millions displaced, searching for home in a landscape that no longer recognized them. Children wandering roads, clutching photographs of parents who would never return. Cities rebuilt not with pride, but necessity. And amid the ruins, people asked the same question, over and over: how did this happen? No one truly answered. The victors rebuilt, but differently. The United States, untouched at home, turned its industry toward prosperity. The Soviet Union, scarred but victorious, turned its victory into a shield, the Iron Curtain slowly descending. In the middle, Europe divided itself with suspicion and wire. A new kind of war began to take shape, cold, quiet, invisible. But before the propaganda and politics hardened again, there was a brief moment, a fragile breath, when people looked around and saw the scale of what had been lost. Entire generations gone, languages silenced, cultures scattered like dust, and beneath the surface, buried under layers of denial and fear, the knowledge that the war's darkest work had not fully vanished. In the rubble of Dresden, A boy found a charred notebook with strange formulas. In the forests of Poland, villagers stumbled upon sealed tunnels filled with crates stamped Geheime Reichssache, top secret of the Reich. In the Japanese countryside, engineers discovered wreckage from experiments the army had ordered destroyed. Across continents, whispers began, of technologies tested, of archives hidden, of scientists whose research survived in silence. The ashes of victory were heavy with unfinished stories. Some would surface decades later, shocking historians and survivors alike. Others remained sealed, gathering dust in vaults beneath capitals that once fought each other. Every nation, it seemed, had something to hide. As spring returned in 1946, the world tried to breathe again. Flags rose over new governments. Soldiers went home, though home no longer felt the same. Families rebuilt brick by brick, memory by memory, but in their dreams, many still heard it. The drone of engines, the thunder of artillery, the silence after an explosion when the world stops moving for just a second. A silence that said, remember, always remember, and so they did. But remembrance has its own weight and its own limits. Some stories were too painful, too dangerous, too inconvenient to tell. They sank beneath the surface of history, waiting, like the artifacts in forgotten tunnels, for someone, someday, to unearth them again. Chapter 5: Shadows that still remain. The war ended, but its echo never did. Across the continents, as cities rebuilt and monuments rose, the true legacy of World War II hid in silence, in locked rooms, classified archives, and the uneasy conscience of a generation. It was not only about victory or defeat anymore, it was about what survived in the shadows. In the years that followed, governments turned secrets into weapons. Operation Paperclip brought former Nazi scientists to America. Their knowledge folded quietly into the dawn of the space age. The Soviet Union did the same, racing to claim the spoils of science from the ashes of the Reich. What began as recovery soon became rivalry. A cold war of intelligence and innovation built on the bones of the old one. Missiles that reached the edge of space. Rockets that carried the same mathematics once aimed at London. It was progress born from ruin. But beneath the triumph of modernity, unease grew. Survivors spoke of missing archives. Research facilities sealed before liberation. Convoys of trucks that disappeared into the Alps. Experiments never mentioned in court. Files stamped "destroy" after reading. Orders signed, then erased. It was as if the war's darkest ambitions had been transferred, not ended. Scientists once condemned now found new homes in laboratories under different flags, working toward different kinds of supremacy. The Cold War didn't just divide nations, it divided truth. Propaganda blurred the line between revelation and concealment. Each side accused the other of harboring war criminals, of hiding forbidden technologies. Every discovery was redacted, every rumor investigated, then buried. And for ordinary people, the war became something distant, something contained within museums and schoolbooks. But in the quiet halls of intelligence agencies, it was still alive. In the 1950s, when the first atomic tests lit up the Nevada desert, some of the engineers watching knew the formulas by heart, because they had written them years before in another country, under another flag. The Cold War's miracles were not as new as they seemed. The jet age, rocketry, the race to space, all traced back to experiments conceived in wartime desperation. A few historians whispered that humanity's greatest technological leap had been built atop its darkest moral fall. For the survivors, life moved on, but memory lingered in unexpected ways. A woman in Warsaw, who once hid children beneath her floorboards, later saw their names etched in museums. A soldier who liberated Buchenwald could never again sleep through silence. A German mechanic, once drafted into the Wehrmacht, spent his old age repairing clocks, saying it was the only way he could control time again. The war had changed not just history, but the texture of human life itself. Decades passed. The world modernized. Skyscrapers rose where rubble once lay. But every so often, the earth gave something back. A rusted helmet unearthed by construction workers. A sealed bunker exposed by erosion. A cache of documents found behind a wall in an abandoned hospital. Each discovery reopened wounds thought long healed. They reminded us that history does not vanish. It waits. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, archives opened for the first time. What researchers found shocked even the most seasoned historians. Entire programs dedicated to biological warfare, psychological conditioning, and covert operations carried out under the veil of liberation. Western intelligence files mirrored them almost exactly. The enemy had changed, but the methods had not. The lessons of World War II had been learned, yes, but not always the right ones. And still, the earth keeps whispering. In Poland's forests, radar scans detect metal deep beneath the soil. Perhaps a buried train, perhaps something else. In Japan, declassified blueprints reveal experimental submarines that never launched. In the mountains of Norway, explorers stumble upon sealed tunnels filled with wartime machinery no one remembers building. Each clue adds another layer to a history that refuses to stay buried. As historians dig deeper, they find not just relics, but reminders that secrecy itself became the war's final survivor. Nations emerged from the conflict promising transparency, yet all carried within them the instinct to hide. Perhaps that is the truest inheritance of the 20th century, that progress and concealment walk hand in hand. The generation that lived through it is almost gone now. Their voices fade, their diaries crumble, their medals tarnish, but their silence still speaks. It tells us that the line between survival and morality is thinner than we like to believe. It warns that civilization is fragile, and that even in victory, darkness can linger, waiting for its next command. Today, we walk through museums and memorials, reading plaques, watching grainy footage, listening to narrators describe what happened. But outside, under our feet, the remnants of that war remain. Not just metal and stone, but choices, ideas, and secrets, too dangerous to forget. They lie in the soil of every nation touched by conflict, silent but unbroken. History is not buried, it only sleeps. And somewhere, beneath the quiet fields of Europe, the last shadows of that terrible century still wait, patient, preserved, and watching us, to see if we've learned anything at all.